Welcome to Pensar Basketball Live. Grab your morning coffee. Let's get to it. I like doing the one for me, one for you thing. Yesterday's Ulrich Shamshay video, definitely for y'all. This one is probably more for me, but sometimes it happens that I make a video for me and it turns out to be really good for the community as well. I have spent a lot of time with Pensar Basketball talking about the mind of an athlete. I've called players low IQ to, maybe some criticism there. I've also talked a lot about how a special mind like a Scottie Barnes, and now more recently an Ulrich Shamshay, how that can be a great magnifier of success. What motivated this video actually was a reel. Sometimes I'm scrolling a reel and it gets my mind jogging. And the reel was of Kevin Durant. And I started thinking about my earliest memories of Kevin Durant. And if y'all remember the interview with Jeff Doughton's trainer, Brian Inge, he also talked about Kevin Durant because he knew Kevin Durant as, when he was coming up through high school. And one of the things that anyone who knew Kevin Durant at that early stage of his career, that same, easy money sniper, the guy who's being called the greatest player in FIBA history, the greatest, the top scorer in US men's Olympic history, the guy who came back from an Achilles tear, which, again, most athletes are not supposed to be able to do, and basically returned to form and is as efficient as he's ever been. That guy was not even the best player in his high school for a while. Michael Jordan got cut from his varsity basketball team. Scottie Barnes was deemed a zero level scorer by a so called draft expert. Derrick White was not even recruited out of high school. Scottie Pippen was not very highly recruited either. There's a lot of players that we think about now and we really do rewrite the page on them. Early memories of stories about Kobe Bryant, right? Kobe, was a little bit older than me, so I would always hear about him when he was 17, when I was, I think, 12. And so you hear these stories about this legendary kid at Lower Merion High School doing all this stuff, but he wasn't that far removed from being a kid who was getting absolutely dusted in grade 5, grade 6, grade 7, etc. He was not the most athletic, the most skilled. He wasn't really the most anything. He became, and what he became is very different story than what he was. When I was tutoring kids in, in university, I've always had a passion for education. Maybe in another life, I would have been a professor or a high school teacher or something because I respect the profession so much. But I always wondered why. Why some kids didn't succeed. I wondered why some kids learned so quickly and why some kids didn't learn very quickly at all. I thought very often about some of the kids that I went to high school with, some of the kids that were very smart, but just didn't succeed in the classroom. Maybe they succeeded on the streets. Maybe they succeeded with money and women and business, but they couldn't succeed in the classroom. And then there were people who succeeded in the classroom, like my father, but could not succeed at life. Couldn't figure people out, couldn't figure out their boss, right? My dad, to this day, when my dad died, I I gotta say I didn't know my dad too well when he passed away, right? Cisco saying, first time commentator, long time listener, checking in from the UK. Thank you for checking in from the UK. I love doing lives at this time because we often get people from different time zones and we get to see how global, the community really is. So thanks for chiming in. My dad was, according to most people who knew him, the smartest person that anyone had ever met. He's a hell of a lot smarter than I have ever been, from what I understand of how smart he was. But he did not succeed in life by the conventional metric of having a good job, having money, having success, having family. For a very long period of time, managing interpersonal relationships, being happy. He didn't find success in that sense, but in terms of just figuring things out and being an engineer, my dad was probably the smartest person most people have ever met. The people who met him would say that he's the smartest person they ever met. So his failures in many ways, in many regards, his marriage, his job, his money, why was he always in debt? Always fascinated me. So you can be super smart and be really not successful in life. And then there were people that I didn't think were all that smart, but they were very successful. And so I started thinking that there must be something happening in the mind of somebody who is very successful or is generally successful in life versus someone who's not. And so I started looking for trends. So when I started getting into tutoring, I would often look for kids and I would look at how they would learn. I would look at kids who would learn and then forget things. I would look at kids who would learn things in 2 days versus kids who would learn the same thing that that other kid learned in 2 days in 2 months. It often became a bit of a fascination of mine to try and draw some sort of connection between how people learn, what their experiences are, and how that translates to success. And ultimately, I think that I've come up with enough that I can meet somebody and have a pretty good idea based on talking to them whether or not they are geared for success. Being geared for success, however, it's important to realize that being geared for success, being primed for success, having the right aptitude or right formula for success does not mean you will achieve success. It just means you have a better shot. The title of this video is The Brain is Only 2% of the Body, which is true. And yet it takes up more than 20% of the body's energy. Our minds matter so much, not only in terms of how we learn, what we're able to learn, what levels of thinking we are able to achieve. The Bloom's taxonomy, somewhat outdated, but we can talk about that. We can look at this real quick. So effectively, this is something from, pre-Cold War times, which is Bloom's taxonomy, which effectively puts into hierarchy the levels of learning, the 6 levels of learning. So the basic at the very bottom is remember, recall, rote, right? Recall facts and basic concepts, define, duplicate, list, memorize, state, repeat. This is basically your high school education and probably why you hated high school so much because very often you were asked to regurgitate things that you were learning. Did you really understand why that war happened? Did you really understand why that general did what he did or said what he said? Probably not. If you were taught probably incorrectly, very many exams that we took in high school only measure our ability to remember. They don't fully measure our ability to understand until we get to later levels. And of course, if you're a master's student or a doctorate student or whatever, if you've achieved, higher levels of education, you probably had to get much further than remembering things. Now, a professor is asking you why things happened. They're vastly more concerned with whether or not you know which formula to use in which scenario, why the formula exists in the first place, how to improve on this formula, and so you get to higher levels of thinking. You go to understanding. So explaining ideas or concepts, classify, describe, discuss, explain, identify, right? Recognize, report, select, translate, right? Then you get one level up, which is apply. So use information in new situations. Now, as I'm saying all of this, please try to think about how all of this applies to a basketball court because I promise you it does. So use information. So in apply, it's use information in new situations, execute, implement, solve, use, demonstrate, interpret, operate, schedule, and sketch. Okay. Then we get to analyze, the 4th level. So draw connections among ideas, differentiate, organize, relate, compare, contrast, distinguish, examine, experiment, question, test. We go one up to evaluate. Now, most people will never get to analyzing, evaluating, and creating. I gotta be honest, it's just not, it's usually just not where the average person's mind goes to, right? Most people can get to remembering things, understanding things, and applying things. That's about as far as it goes. Analyzing, evaluate, and create sometimes gets a little bit harder. So analyzing, drawing connections among ideas, we talked about it. Evaluate, justify a stand or a decision, right? So if you can appraise things, argue things, defend, judge, select, support, value, critique, and weigh. And then finally, it is to create. So it is to produce new or original work, which should be, in my opinion, the aim of any human being is to create, right? Now, whether you want to take that at the most core, most essential way of create a family, or whether you want to take it to, something artistic like writing a book or making a film or creating, a cure for hunger or creating a solution for, poverty or purifying water or figuring out our energy crisis. Whatever it is, the highest levels, when you think about the highest paid jobs in the world, they are all asking you to think on levels of create and evaluate. That's it. They don't care if you can remember shit. You have assistants for that. They don't care if you can understand things. That's assumed. They don't care if you can apply and analyze because you have workers for that. No. The highest paid executives in the world, your CEOs, your CFOs, your, presidents, your Masai Ujiri's of the world are all asked to create and evaluate. That is literally what they are paid to do. Masai Ujiri is not being paid to go to France. He's not being paid to do that. He may choose to do that. He's not being paid to be on the road and doing what Joe Tuamu is doing. He's not doing that. What he is paid to do is to make decisions. And those decisions are based on his vast understanding of his area of specialty. Now, Masai Ujiri is one side of this equation. The other side of the equation is, of course, a guy like Scottie Barnes or Derrick White or Kevin Durant or any player. Pick one. Any player who got better. Any player. Now, one thing I'll say is most players who have vastly exceeded their draft day expectations, which includes Nikola Jokic, which includes Trae Young, which includes Luka Doncic. It literally includes any person who beat the bar that was set for them. That does not include an Andrew Wiggins. That does not include an RJ Barrett. That does not include a Zion Williamson. That does not include anyone who was very highly touted at an early age and then fell short of that bar. I'm talking about people who jumped the bar. I'm talking about the people who, okay, you thought they were going to be good. They turned out to be great. You thought they were going to be great. They were greater. LeBron James is definitely in there. Michael Jordan, if people knew how good Michael Jordan was, there's no chance he goes third in the draft, right? So what is it that we are missing in these kids? And of course, I'm talking about this because of the last video we just did. I would say half of that video was spent exploring the mind of Uri Shamshay. What makes him special? And Joe talked in the last video. To those of you who have not checked it out, I just want to say huge response from that video and a huge thanks from me. I was a little nervous, right? You're releasing a video about this. That, I don't know. I was curious to see how it would do, and it did really well. And I loved the response. I loved all the comments. It's really nice to hear from people, and a lot of people wrote DMs and private messages. Some people sent e-transfers. A lot of people sent super chats. It's very nice, and I really appreciate that y'all. That video vibed with you. I really hope that, and I know for a fact that Ulrich saw it. That Joe has seen it, so it's all good. I'm really glad that happened, and what it got my mind thinking about was what makes this kid special? Am I gassing myself up on this? When Joe says he's gonna he learns in 3 years what these other guys learned in 6 years. What does that mean? I think it means this. I think a lot of it means this, right? When he says, right, when Joe says that when he goes into a class, he's mapping out everything, right? When he's talking about Masai Ujiri, did anyone catch the fact that when he was talking about Masai Ujiri, when he was talking about Uri Shamshay, that he sounded like he was describing a very similar person? They're thinkers. They're people who are thinking ahead. But why are you thinking ahead? Not to remember, certainly not to understand. It is not just to apply. It's not just to analyze. It's to create. It's to create. Masai Ujiri saw the potential in Africa before it became a buzzword. He literally invented this. He created it. He created the NBA's push into Africa. It's the biggest untapped market in the world. It's the biggest open secret now. But how do you be early? It's easy to mimic takes after, right? It's easy to call Cade Cunningham, overrated now. Could you have done it 3 years ago? It's easy to say Scottie Barnes is an all-star today, but could you have seen it 5 years ago? How do you get how do you get to level 6 thinking, man? How do you get to the create and evaluate? I think you have to do it, honestly. You want my opinion? You do it by ignoring the first four. I know that things build on each other, but you just have to trust that the other four levels of analyze, apply, understand, and remember are going to take care of themselves. You devote 85 to 90% of your mind into creation and evaluation, and the rest will take care of itself. That's just how I've always felt. That's how I've always looked at it. Our minds cannot focus on two things at once. If right now you're listening to me and you're drinking coffee, you think you're doing both things, but you're actually doing one thing and then you're doing another thing. Multitasking is virtually impossible. So when Phil Jackson talks about Pau Gasol learning the triangle in, a day, well, why is that a benefit? I'll tell you something. No two basketball games that have ever been played in NBA history, FIBA history have ever been the same. Ever. Too many instances, too many variables, too many players, too many different players. There's not even two games that are 99.8% similar. So every game is a new game. So when, for instance, I'll give you an example. Let's say Ulrich, I got to get out of this idea of Ul. It's Yule. My bad. Well, let's say Ulrich has this thing where in summer league he brings the basketball down and a guard swipes down on his hand. Hand is part of the basketball in the NBA, and so he loses the basketball. Okay, so the next time, right? The coach says, "Okay, they're breaking down the game film." So, I mean, how many different levels of thought process are there, right? You gotta remember, right? So you gotta remember when you brought it down, right? You gotta understand why you're not supposed to bring it down. And then the next time you're in that situation again, you gotta apply it, which means you're not gonna bring it down again. You're gonna keep the ball high so that you don't get it poked away, right? But you're also going to analyze how that particular instance of not bringing it down in the post can apply to other places where you may want to bring the basketball a little bit lower, right? Your mind, when you talk about a Fred VanVleet, what makes Fred VanVleet successful or more successful than other undersized guards who failed? Certainly, Fred VanVleet is the funniest example because, again, it's a player that I've trashed endlessly, but also a player that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. So let's not talk about Fred VanVleet, the politician, Fred VanVleet, the media darling, Fred VanVleet, the master manipulator. We're going to talk about that. Just talk about Fred VanVleet, the basketball professional, Fred VanVleet, the entrepreneur, Fred VanVleet, the basketball player, Fred VanVleet, the evolution story. This is a very, very good player. This is a very good player who did a lot of good things. Y'all ever heard of compound interest? Of course you have, right? It means that good decisions build on good decisions, build on good decisions. Really. If you put away $500,000 at modest interest when you were 18 years old, you retire a millionaire, right? But if you do the same thing when you're 60, you don't retire a millionaire. You retire damn near broke. And that's the difference. It's compound interest. It is the decision that builds on the decision. So, understanding this one thing, this is why we don't see how quickly players can get better and how some players can't. So take the example of Julius remembering not to bring the basketball down. And let's say there's 6 versions of Julius. Okay. Level 1 Julius all the way up to level 6 Julius. Okay. So level 1 Julius just needs to remember the situation and what was told to him in the film session, which is don't bring the basketball down when there are guards nearby. Keep the basketball high, right? He doesn't understand why it's been told to him. He's not quite sure how to apply it. He can't analyze it. He certainly can't create out of it or evaluate it. He just remembers that someone told him that. And by the way, just in case you're about to clown level one Ulrich, the vast majority of us forget a lot of what we are told on a day-to-day basis. Things that we learn go in one ear and out the other. So if you think that it's just so easy, please don't clown level one Ulrich. Level one Ulrich is a hell of a step up from the average person because the average person again is forgetting a lot of stuff. So if level one Ulrich can just do one thing for us, it is to remember this thing that this coach is telling him about where to keep his feet on a jump shot and not to bring the basketball down low, right? Things of that nature, right? Even when you think about how to map out a double team or a triple team, well, if some coach gives you a pointer in a film session of how to deal with a double team at the pinch post, how do you then apply that to being double teamed in the corner of the floor? How do you take that in terms of being double teamed on the other corner of the floor, but this time in transition? You understand what I mean? Okay. So level one Ulrich remembers. Level two Ulrich, he can understand to some extent why he's being told this. He can recognize different situations in which this is going to happen again, which means that the next time somebody doubles him and he brings it down, he'll be able to say two things. Number one, this is what I did wrong, and this is what you told me to do instead. But he hasn't quite figured out how to apply it outside of that situation. That's where level three Urish comes in, where he can apply the same guidance that he was given, this one thing that he was taught in this film session by Jama Malalela or someone else. And he is not only able to remember it, he's not only able to understand it, but he's also able to apply it in a new situation, which means that he doesn't need to be in the exact situation again. He can apply it generally. He can apply it to new situations. Now, what about analyzing? Differentiate, organize, relate, compare, contrast, distinguish, examine, experiment, question, test. Can he now apply the logic that he has gained or apply the mindset or understanding and conceptual understanding of what to do on the basketball court? Can he now take what he learned about himself offensively and apply it to defense? Right? Can he based on what he now knows what to do offensively, can he now say, this player is doing that incorrectly, and here's how I will be able to capitalize on their mistake? So flipping offense to defense, right? Can he now take that? I'm giving a really basic example of the simplest thing that you would teach maybe a 7-year-old kid. Don't bring the basketball low when you're in the post and get poked away, right? If you're tall. If you're short, you have no choice. But if you're tall, keep the basketball high, right? This is the most basic thing. But now, can you apply it to the defensive end, right? And now evaluate and create comes to the next level, right? This is the highest level Yorish. And this is where I believe this kid is operating at. This is where I think Scottie Barnes was operating at. This is where I think LeBron James is operating at. Of course, different levels of court mapping, different levels of IQ, and all that stuff. So that is the first thing, which is how do you learn? And that's this, right? That's how you learn. I'll give you the second element of this. The second element of it is who you actually are and what you need, right? What do you need and what is your path to self actualization and esteem, right? So Maslow's hierarchy of needs often, in my opinion, is very popular, but also, in my opinion, very poorly understood. It is thought that creation, beauty, unity, aesthetics, exploration, etc., the self-actualization tier is the highest point of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in that that need comes above other needs. But actually, it's backwards. The most basic needs that we all have are for food, water, shelter, bare necessities of survival. Then we have needs for safety, personal security, resources, sources of income, structure, and order. Then we have social needs, friendship, intimacy, community, sense of belonging. Then we have dignity, respect, achievement, purpose, recognition. And then after that, only after that, do we get self actualization. Someone once told me that all happiness comes down to three things. Three things: wealth, love, what was it? Wealth, love, and health. Okay. Three things. I will guarantee you right now, if you don't have those three things, you're probably deeply unhappy. Prove me wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. But it's very likely that if you don't have even one of those things, you may experience some levels of unhappiness, right? If you have a tremendous amount of wealth, however you describe wealth, whether you think money is wealth, whether you think social status is wealth or whatever you describe as wealth, if you have that and you have love in the sense that you have people that you love in your life and people who love you, but you don't have your health and you're about to die, you're probably unhappy. Probably. And if you have your health and you have your wealth, but you have nothing to love and no one to love, well, then you're probably unhappy too. It's important to understand that these things do work on a string. And when I look at this, I think to myself that a person who does not feel safe does not have a chance at self actualization or esteem or social. These are levels that you have to swim through and swim up. And so when we evaluate a prospect, we do have to understand where they're coming from mentally and what could possibly trip them up. And one of the things that I think a lot of prospects can get tripped up on is this idea that they have demons from childhood, or they have gaps in their understanding, or maybe even psychological problems. Maybe it is cognitive issues, maybe like an ADHD or something like that. But ultimately, trouble with authority, something like that, where you don't feel safe if someone is, telling you what to do. Things of that nature. When you start to get into the weeds of trying to explore why people fail and succeed, think about this. Can you listen when you're unwilling to listen? Can you hear when you are unwilling to listen? I just had a debate today, and I'm not going to shout out the person. It was particularly frustrating. I was talking, and because this person did not like what I was saying, they were just staring off into the air. They didn't want to hear what I had to say. And that to me is a sign, just again, my opinion, that you're not listening. That what I've said to you has threatened some element of you that is going to stop you from even paying attention to what I'm going to say. You're not even hearing it. You can't hear it. Do you think that Scottie Barnes at 19 was more talented than OJ Mayo? I don't think Scottie himself would tell you that. Do you think that Kobe Bryant was more talented than Eddie Jones at the same age? He probably wasn't. Now, Kobe was a hell of a talent, 17, but Eddie Jones was really, really good too. There is something for sure. You know, there is a combination of so many things. And that's why it's sometimes difficult to explain or understand, because it's not just one thing. I wish I could just say, look at a guy and say, okay, well, he's 6'10, he's going to be successful. He's 6'2, he's not going to be successful. Unfortunately, this is the way a lot of people do think, but that's never the case. It's also not enough to say, well, this guy has a really sick crossover and a really good jump shot. He's going to be really good in the NBA. And this guy, he can't really shoot, so he's going to be a failure in the NBA. I don't think that's it either. Is it enough to just hand someone an aptitude test like the Andrea Bargnani, right? The caliper test. Is it enough to just gauge where someone's mental fragility is at? No, I don't think so. Would it be enough to just give someone an IQ test? No, I don't think that's sufficient at all. It certainly helps to understand. So, what are the factors that are going into this? Okay. So, ultimately, you obviously want a learner who can create, right? You do. You also want a person who is capable of self actualization, which is to say, I don't want to have to dictate your off season for you. I really don't. I don't want to have to tell you, oh, by the way, Yuri Shamshay, you remember what you said about wanting to be great? You got to be great. No, I want a kid who's self determined. I want a kid who gets into the gym. I don't want a kid I have to remind to come in early. I want a kid who asks me, when am I supposed to be there? I tell him 5 o'clock in the morning, and he's there at 4:30, already in a deep sweat. That's who you want. That's who you always want. You can break it down to I want a kid who's hardworking, but not all work is the same. There are plenty of people who go through a 2-hour workout and get zero benefit because they don't have the focus. If you watch someone work out and you're like, you're doing this all wrong. You're not going at game speed. You're listening to music. You're zoning in and out. You're just going through the motions. You don't want to get better. The Kevin Durant reel that I watched, it was about his obsession with the process of work. There's no success. There's no success and failure in accidents. This is not an accident. Durant's success is not an accident. I remember watching Kevin Durant when he declared for the NBA draft. And then, of course, I was a huge fan of his at Texas. And I created this video called Kevin Durant, the number 23. And in fact, I've never been higher on a prospect in my entire life than Scottie and Kevin Durant. Those are the two guys. LeBron, I really liked. I liked Andrea too. Like, just keep it a stack. I'm not right about this, but I really liked Andrea Bargnani as well. I thought that he had something very special, and his failure really taught me a lot as well. But Kevin Durant and Scottie Barnes, like these two to me were like at the very top of the draft. And I'm like, these guys are going to be great, great. Because they're driven by something else. The work ethic is not the only question. The question is not whether you're putting hours in the gym and whatever. No, the question is how hard are you chasing this? What focus? What's your level of focus? What's your level of retention? So, if I'm going to break down the success and failure of an athlete, let me tell you things that I really look for in an athlete. And maybe hopefully after this video, you'll understand why I support certain people and why I'm not so supportive of other people. You might see why I'm super high on a guy like Scottie Barnes or a guy like Yuri Shamshay, but why I may not be as high on someone like Alex Sarr. So I'll give you the breakdown. The number one thing, obviously, when we're talking about basketball, the number one thing is always going to be your level of commitment to getting better. Always. But if we're being completely honest, the thing we don't talk about is what are your physical limitations? Okay. Now, I'm not willing to sit here and tell you that because you're 5'9" or 5'10" that you can't be successful in the NBA. Certainly, we have seen plenty of guys who are 5'10", 5'11" be successful in the NBA. Damon Stoudemire, Allen Iverson, Isaiah Thomas. There's a lot of guys who are undersized who are successful in the NBA. You just have to know you're undersized and work 50 times harder. I get it. I get it. But I don't think Marquise Noel and Grady Dick have the same chances of success if they both chase it as hard. So clearly, there's some level of physical limitations. If you have super short arms, you're going to have a very difficult time in the NBA. If you're not athletic, you're going to have a difficult time in the NBA. If you can't move very fast, there's the physics of the sport. You know, you can chase it as much as you want, but if you can't get your shot off, you can't get separation, you can't score. And if you can't keep up with your man, you can't defend. You have no place in the NBA. Maybe you belong in Europe or China, or maybe you deserve to be in the MVP of your rec league. Ultimately, there's obviously a physical limitation to how base level of physicality that you need or physical gifts that you need to be an NBA player. This shit is not for everybody. Okay, and if you want any proof of that, look at how many people are related to people in the NBA. Just really just look at it. It's a lot of this is genetic. This is not rocket science here, okay? That's not to say that Scottie Barnes' children will be NBA players. That really does depend on who he marries or whatever. But it just so happens that, Del Curry's two sons are in the NBA. Okay. If there's so many examples of this where there's brothers and, we can look at, gosh, damn it, the Teague brothers, there's so many, right? And that's not even including Giannis and Thanasis. So my point is part of it is genetic. But beyond the genetics, beyond the physical gifts, beyond all of that, what is the differentiator between an Anthony Bennett, right, who didn't make it despite having tremendous physical gifts, and someone like Scottie Barnes? Is Scottie Barnes really way more physically gifted than Anthony Bennett? Yes, he is more physically gifted, but there's clearly so many other things, right? So the first thing is that. The second thing is overall your approach to work and ultimately how you define your success. I remember meeting Catherine. To those of you who are real OGs of the channel, you remember my neuroscience video with Catherine, in which I remember meeting her. And often when I was younger, I would tell people that I was really smart. And I was very proud of the fact that I tested gifted at a young age because it gave me a sense of self-esteem because I didn't have a lot else to be proud of myself. So I really prided myself on being smart. But Catherine did not pride herself on being smart. She prided herself on working hard. She would openly say, she's like, I'm not that smart. I just work really hard. And I thought that was such a fresh and weird admission. Be like, why would you ever want to admit that you're not smart if you're achieving the results of smart people? She was doing this at 18 years old, which should really give you a clue into why she is as successful as she is today. The self-actualization right there and the self-identification, the very fact that she's able to point to that, even when her results are telling her that she is smart, that she is able to categorically say to herself, no, I'm not smart. The fact that I'm achieving these results is largely a function of my work ethic, should tell you that a person who is that way, when someone starts identifying themselves as gifted, the modus of control goes towards the gift, not towards the self, is actually quite helpful to start redefining yourself as someone who works hard, especially if you are already someone who works hard, because that is something that you can always control. Your gifts, by the way, are not something you can control. So you are kind of giving the power away to somebody else or something else. It's like, yeah, I don't know why I'm successful. It came from the heavens, from the earths. No, I work hard is why I'm successful. The people who say that they are successful because they work hard are already way more likely to succeed, in my humble opinion. So you have that in terms of how you describe your success in your relationship with work. So we have the physical gifts, we have that. Now it comes down to how you learn, right? And how you learn is not only going to dictate what you learn, it's also going to dictate the speed at which you learn. Okay. There is an absorption element of this. Okay. I can give you a book on Serbian history or a book on neuroscience or a book on mathematics and stock trading, etc. One of you is going to pick it up in 3 weeks. One of you is going to pick it up in 3 months. One of you is going to pick it up in 3 years. And one of you is going to pick it up never. And ultimately, it is always going to be an advantage of the person who can pick it up in 3 weeks. Always. Because when we were talking about rapid development, like the development that Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam saw, as opposed to delayed, progress, which is what Bruno Caboclo saw, there's a gap. There's a gap because in the NBA, you don't have 7 years to get better. They're judging you month by month. And 2 bad months, 3 bad months, if they didn't invest a high lottery pick in you or a high draft pick in you, you get traded, you get moved. Now you have to learn a new system. The whole thing is screwed. You got to make new relationships. You waste that time. And if you're slow again, guess what? 6 months later, same situation, off to a new team. Happens one more time. Congratulations. Now you go to China. Okay. So it does matter that you are fast. Okay. You are going to have a massive advantage as an NBA player if you can pick things up quickly, which means you can pick up your place on the pecking order quickly. You can pick up your relationships with assistants quickly. You can pick up offensive and defensive concepts, which is team concepts quickly. So that really does come down to this. It's because obviously you're going to need to remember things, you're going to need to understand things, you're going to need to apply things. But then what comes with experience is the ability to analyze, evaluate, and create things. And that is going to have to be done on rapid speed, especially if you want to make a part of the rotation. You take a guy like Rasheed Wallace, who was able to integrate himself into a championship team mid-season. You tell me Rasheed Wallace isn't super smart. Of course he's super smart. It's the only way to be that successful at that task because he had to do everything on the fly. He didn't have a training camp. Some people are slow, other people are not. To the advantage goes to the fast person, is what I'm saying. Okay. So we got the genetic gifts. We got the do you define yourself as a worker? Do you have a good relationship with work? Are you a hard worker? Then we get the how do you learn? How quickly do you learn? Okay. Now let's talk about the fourth thing, which is what's your psychological makeup? And that's really this, right? What is your propensity for self actualization? How likely are you to succeed when you have a self destruct streak? How likely are you to succeed when you have a terrible habit of, falling into addictions? How likely are you to succeed when you have poor executive control, when you are predisposed to diabetes, when you have health concerns from neglect at an early age, when you just do not have good impulse control? These are all these things that again mentally lean you towards success or failure in terms of different outcomes, right? Okay, talk about the final thing, which is the speed at which you are able to process information in real time. So it's one thing to say, okay, Yulri Shamshay, I'll give you 3 months to learn our playbook. Congratulations. You know, Yulri Shamshay, I'm telling you this, thing about on offense. How do you apply it to defense? Congratulations. Now it comes down to applying this shit in real time. And now I'm going to say your IQ and your overall processing speed is not your memory, is not your RAM. We're talking straight up processor graphic card. Okay. How quickly are you mapping everything? Y'all remember those old video games? Do you remember those old video games, like the ones that are sitting behind me? And you would be driving a car, right? You'd be driving a car and you're going forward. And it's like as you're going forward, the computer is generating the mountains. Give me a like if you remember that, right? it was just processing as you were going because there were limitations to the technology that you were working with, right? When Scottie Barnes is able to pretty much the minute he inbounds the basketball, he is able to not only understand where all 9 players are, but also a very good understanding of where they're going to be, where they're supposed to be, and is immediately able to identify which player is out of place and how one player being out of place and another player not moving into the space that that player. Do you understand what I'm talking about? This shit is impossible. It's, well, I don't say impossible. It's not impossible because there are certain players who can do it. It is the rarest of rarest gifts. Now, I don't know for sure that there isn't some player out there who has as gifted a mind as Scottie Barnes or Grant Hill, LeBron James, Kyle, Boris Diaw. You go through the list of great playmakers, Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, whatever. You go, 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 go. Okay. The reason these guys are able to display their gifts, Magic Johnson, Bill Russell, the only way that these guys are able to extend their gifts and show you their gifts on a nightly basis in the NBA is largely because they are satisfying the other criteria to be at this level. Because if they didn't have great work ethic, it doesn't matter how quickly they map the floor. If they can't learn the offense, can't learn the defense, it doesn't matter what their instincts are on the court. If they just don't understand, if they don't have the retention, the ability to even retain plays, when your coach runs when your coach runs let's just say you have a play called floppy. When they run floppy and you can't remember where you're supposed to be, well, you're already fucked. It doesn't matter that you know certain things intuitively. You have to have the basic building blocks of all this stuff. If you have a brilliant mind for the game, but you don't have a brilliant mind for avoiding the Doritos, right? And then the sugary cereals and the sugary snacks, if you didn't have the wherewithal to listen to your trainer when they were telling you to stay in shape in the off season, if you had that self-destruct streak, you will fail. For 42 minutes, I've been trying to talk about success and failure at the NBA. And I can tell you that even with all of these factors, even if you check for all these factors, at best, you're going to get a prospect who is 60% likely to succeed. In the best case scenario, you get a prospect who is 55 to 60% likely to succeed. And then you can go down from there to a prospect who's 10% likely to succeed, 0% likely to succeed, 2% likely to succeed, etc. And the likelihood of success is not a guarantee for success, nor is it a guarantee for failure. There's a prospect who was 2% likely to succeed that succeeded, and there was a prospect who was 60% likely to succeed who failed. That's how variables and that's how odds work. Okay. So drafting is never an exact science. Do not think that because you're Shamshay or has these incredible mental gifts to be disciplined because he dreams big, because he's motivated by something. All of these things. Ah, yes, the motivation. I forgot one thing, and that is probably the thing that caps off all things, maybe the thing that amplifies all things. It's the thing that sharpens your mind. It keeps you on your diet. It keeps you focused. It keeps you away from the club and away from the stupid TikTok shit. And it keeps you away, it keeps you focused. It keeps you in bed on time. It keeps you with your trainer and keeps you in the gym. It keeps you on your money, on your mind. And that is your why. That is your why. It's your why, and it's also your self-awareness, your ability to reflect, your ability to understand who am I, where am I, and never gas yourself up too much. Never get a little too ahead of yourself. Never start believing, never getting high in your own supply, never getting into this habit that because your boy and your other boy and your mom think you're an all-star when the coach thinks you're not good enough to even get minutes on his team, that you know which side to listen to, that you have the good sense of self to be like, you know what? I understand these people mean well, but they need to shut the hell up. Even the understanding of who to surround yourself with. You realize how often I've talked about the good people around Scotty? How many times? I've talked about Brian. I talk about his friends. I talk about the people that are around him, the people he chooses to be around. They're not gas up people. They're not people who are like, yo, you're so great. They don't do that. Like, to my understanding, They don't do that. They're not sitting there telling him bullshit about himself that he doesn't like. They're not like, "Oh, you're a great shooter. You're a great shooter." No. I think they're being pretty real with him, right? So, that's where you have to really understand, is that a choice or is that a blessing? Is he blessed with great people around him, or did he choose to keep good people around him? Did he choose to keep people honest? You know how easy it is to become a billionaire or a multimillionaire and have everyone around you afraid to even say anything negative about you? How easy it would be for a Fred VanVleet to basically cut out anyone from his life who's even remotely critical of him, right? You need people in your life who are willing to tell you the truth. But more importantly than people who are willing to tell you the truth, you need you need the good sense of self to keep those people honest, which is that when people tell you the truth, you don't just shut them out and dissuade everyone else around the room for telling you the truth. No, you need to welcome the truth. And that's staying humble. But ultimately, the why matters so much, right? Because once you exhaust your why, you don't have purpose anymore. If your why is your parent has a health concern, well, now I have questions. Which is to say, the minute you sign your NBA contract and you can pay for that surgery, where goes your why? Is that it? Is that the only motivation? If that's the only motivation, then you might fail, right? But then you take a guy like a DeMar DeRozan, who is a guy who absolutely outclassed his draft stock, right? You take a guy like a Scottie Barnes, Kyle Lowry, Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, Serge Ibaka, over and over, OG Anunoby. Every one of these players has one thing in common. They're better than people thought they were at 20, right? And Yulia Shamshay, in my opinion, will be much, much better than people think he is right now at 18. I think he'll have a much better career. And if that were not the case, he would have been a first round pick this year. So frankly, I think he's going to live up to a lot of the lofty expectations that we're putting on him. But ultimately, why? His dream is the biggest dream. You understand? So everything that I talked about, the physical limitations, does he have? No, there's no physical limitations at all. None. Zero. He is about as perfectly designed to play basketball physically as you can imagine for a big in the modern NBA. Then we talk about, the mentality of the man, right? The ability to learn, how he learns. Well, according to Joe, it's fantastic. So we get that box checked out. So we keep checking off boxes and then we get ultimately to the why. And now we have a good idea of the why as well, which is that he wants to build hospitals and schools in his hometown. And that is the biggest motivation because your motivation, I want to say this, just this may be this is a very personal opinion, but this is something that I've found to be true over and over again. When your motivation is you, it's a little flimsy. When your motivation is more than you, when it's bigger than you, especially when it's pure, that's endless. That's the stuff that, Masai Ujiri is moving mountains on, right? Because you understand, Masai Ujiri 24 years ago was a scout for the Orlando Magic, couch surfing. He wasn't making a lot of money. These scouting jobs in the early 2000s before the NBA blew up all the money and stuff and the shit became very serious, there wasn't a lot of money in scouting either. I remember talking to a scout who told me that there was one year where he made $38,000. $38,000, right? So it's not a ton of money, but it was about something more. It was about getting your foot in the door. It's about doing what you needed to do. It's about establishing Giants of Africa. It was about establishing all of that stuff. The vision was so big. So when you want to quit and you're like, look at who suffers if I quit right now. Maybe the greatest amplifier of all of this is love. Do you love your why? And do you love the game? If you love the game and you love your why and you care about yourself enough, I believe you'd be successful more often than not. And that's why I say 60% success rate. We can split atoms and we can split hairs over what type of player you'll become. Maybe you'll become more of a Serge Ibaka. Maybe you'll become more of a Clint Capella. Maybe you'll become more of a Giannis Antetokounmpo. Guess what? I just described three very successful NBA players. Very successful. Maybe you become a Joel Embiid, who's an MVP, or maybe you become a Pascal Siakam, who's all NBA. Maybe you become neither. Maybe you become a Jared Allen or a Nick Claxton. Any way you slice it, I'm describing a successful player. So, success and failure, we overthink it sometimes. It's really not that complicated. I mean, it's fairly complicated because I've just diagrammed how many different things you need to hit and how many different boxes you need to check to be successful. However, when you look at the success and failure in the end, it really does come down to time. It's like a rise over run situation, right? You just need to rise quickly enough that you don't run out of time. I'm sure a lot of us could be very successful if we had 400 years on Earth. We don't have 400 years on Earth. NBA careers are even shorter than that. Most of us will be lucky to get 80 years in life. Most NBA players will be very lucky to get 3 years before the league quits on them. 3 years to prove that you're worth that roster spot. 3 years to worth that you're worth the hundreds of thousands that are going into developing you, marketing you, hiring you, training you. 3 years, max, max. And in those 3 years, you must absorb rapidly. You must work rapidly. You must work well and you must grow. That's it. So when we look at players in the draft, what do we see in them? We see their field goal percentage, their 3-point percentage. We see whether they won, whether they lost. None of these things describe how or why or where. It's just the what. We're so focused on the what. It's the what is this player. When we talk about pre-draft measurements, right? Oh, Scottie Barnes is a 7'4" wingspan. This guy has a 7'11" wingspan. This guy has a 6'10" wingspan. This guy's 6'2". This guy's 6'1". It's all the what. Our entire culture is obsessed with the what. But the why is so lost. The how is missing. The where, all of these other questions that we need to ask ourselves about who we're talking about, why are they doing what they're doing? What drives them? What stops them? What are the hindrances? This is why this channel has focused as much as it has on those other things. Call them intangibles, call them whatever you want. But in the end, I believe that success and failure is determined on the margins of our mind. Okay. Because almost everything that I described, from a predisposition to alcoholism, to an understanding, to ability to retain, to the why, to the ability to process, to the ability to maintain interpersonal relationships, to the ability to retain information and apply it in new scenarios, to the ability to map the court, everything I've described, except for the very first thing, which was the physical limitations, 6 inches between the ears. Everything comes down to that. I watched that video of Vivek Ranadive overriding Pete D'Alessandro for Nick Stauskas at least once a year, every time. And you ask yourself, why did they pick Nick Stauskas? Why did that clip go so viral? There was Chris Mullen, Mitch Richmond. These are guys who were shooters in the NBA. These are guys that in a bar would command the room. You wouldn't be able to say jack shit to them. They all okayed this pick. Why? What was it? Did Nick Stauskas have a 60% likelihood of success? Don't look at it because he didn't succeed in the NBA and say, well, they chose the wrong player. Sometimes you choose the wrong player, you get the wrong outcome. Sometimes you choose the right player, still get the wrong outcome. We not very process based as a society. We are very results based. We're not how and why based. We are very what based. I am obsessed with the why. I'm obsessed with the process. I want to know that you made a 60% decision every time. I think Jamal Shed is a 60% decision. 50 to 60% decision. I think he's one of those guys that is teetering on the edge of he will be very successful. Somewhere, somehow, he's going to be successful. He may not have the ideal physique, he may not have the ideal jump shot, but man, this guy's mind is wired for success. I think of Jonathan Mobo and Ulrich Shamshay, Ulrich Moore, maybe, but both are very good bets to be successful. Very good bets. And then I think of Jacoby Walter, and maybe that's the prospect that feel I know the least about at this point, which is kind of wild because he's our first round pick. Why did I dig more into the second round picks than the first round pick? Well, I'm going to hope that that's because the Raptors dug way more into the first round pick than they dug into the second round picks, even though I know that that's not true. But I hope that all four have a 50 to 60% chance of success. Now, is it possible you strike out on all four? Yes. 100%. It is very possible to have 4 50 to 60% likely success stories that turn into all failures. Perfectly possible. At which point you're back at it again next year, do the same thing all over again. In next year's draft, you have multiple picks again. Do the same thing in 2026. You have 3 picks. So you have 5 more shots over the next 3 years, next 2 years. Not to mention, you already have RJ, Scottie, all that stuff. And all of these guys, what I'm realizing is you don't have any Killian Hayes and James Wisemans on this team. You really don't. I mean, you kind of did last year, but you don't anymore. Everyone you have on this team right now is wired mentally for success. So you roll the dice. Is there a chance that 4 50 to 60% bets all fail? Yes. There's also a chance they all hit. And I'm really hoping that Darko Rajakovic and Jamal Malala become the great equalizers, because the one thing that I did not say is that great coaching is an amplifier. Great coaching and great culture. Great coaching, great culture, great leadership, internal leadership. The fact that Scottie is a franchise player and he is deeply unselfish and a really hard worker. The fact that, these people are coming in happy and healthy every single day. Well, now that 60% goes up to like 70%. You become way more likely to succeed in a good environment than a bad environment, right? Something we don't talk about in the previous regime under Nick Nurse, Fred VanVleet, that whole thing, right? Steele saying our successes and failures are determined by the margins of our mind. Did I say that? Or are you saying that? Or did someone else say that? That sounds like something I just said. Yeah, I think I said that. I did say the margins of mind. Clearly not doing too well. I've been up for exactly 23 hours, so this is me hunkering down at this point. 23 hours, and occasionally I like to have these lives right at the end of a very long period of being up. Not because I think that I'm going to be super entertaining, but because I'm curious. I'm curious actually to see what might come out of my mouth, right? It's good, and weirdly enough, there's a lot of people that believe that you become very creative in the middle of the night for exactly this reason. Because there are certain barriers that keep our mouth from saying things that our mind is going into, and sometimes you can fall into this very loopy half state of sleep and wakefulness and sleep in which your mind taps into ultimate creativity. And I've always found that sometimes when I write, well, I don't say always, but very often when I write something at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., it can become very creative and very original and things that I never even thought to say. So I'm happy to have had a random live about why people fail and succeed. It's probably not going to do very well. I want to thank everybody for, supporting this community. I'll let you all know when we cross 11,000 why 11,000 was such an important number for me, but we're very close. We're sneaky close to 11,000 subscribers. We are about 80 away. And if you could be one of those 80 people, I'll be very appreciative. But if you don't want to be one of those 80 people, I'm still deeply appreciative that you watched this video. And I'll talk to y'all later. Thank you so much. And I don't know, felt cute, might delete later. All right, peace.